We are now less than a month away from the start of the 2025 MLB regular season, and as far as the Mariners spring training camp goes, there are a ton of storylines to cover. From the prospect buzz in camp to the elite starting rotation, the bullpen options, the starting lineup, as well as the new coaching staff and their philosophy, we cover it all today as I am joined by Gary Hill Jr., who is a regular Mariners play-by-play commentator on the radio, as well as the executive producer and engineer for Mariners Radio as well. He joins me from spring training to cover all of this and more. For more content like this, make sure to like and subscribe to The Couch GM on YouTube, find me across audio platforms, give this podcast a 5-star review, and this episode is sponsored by Black Label Supplements. They're a third-party tested, athlete-approved supplement company based here in the Pacific Northwest. Make sure to check out blacklabelsupplements.com, use code CouchGM for 15% off your order. And as always, if you or someone you know is thinking of buying, selling, or refinancing a property on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California, Idaho, or Arizona, make sure to reach out to myself, Connor Webb, as I'm a full-time mortgage broker when I'm not making these sports videos, and it's my goal to help as many sports fans and athletes get into the home of their dreams. If you have any questions whatsoever about buying a home in 2025, make sure to reach out. I'll have a link in the description of this video to reach out and connect. And to get yourself geared up for the regular season, make sure to check out Baseballism. They're my go-to for all things baseball apparel, sports apparel. I'm wearing one of their shirts or hats at all times. Make sure to check out baseballism.com. You can use code CouchGM15 for 15% off your order. And with that, let's get into the podcast. All right, Gary, thanks for joining me. A lot to talk about, a lot of different stories to talk about with the Mariners spring training so far. But let's start off. The Mariners announced their broadcasting team a few weeks ago, and of course, yourself is on the list. Can you walk us through kind of your duties for this next season and what to expect?
Yeah, sure. No, it's super excited. It's a little bit of everything, which is great. But for me, it's since I was a little kid, like Mariners play-by-play has been it. It's been the dream for me. So I'll be doing that every single game, which I'm super excited about, alongside Rick. And I'll be doing all the other same stuff I've been doing along the way, producing the broadcast, engineering the broadcast, the podcast. The different shows that we have during the course of the season. So I love the variety of what I do, and I love all the different things I do. So I'll be doing it all with more play-by-play. So I couldn't be more excited. I'm super
That's
happy
awesome.
about it. Yeah, thanks.
And how many podcasts do you have your fingers in? It looks like five, give or take. With the Mariners podcast, you got the Wheelhouse, you got all these different ones.
Yeah, so Mariners Pod is the main one, and then Wheelhouse, which I really enjoy. I love sitting down and talking to Jerry, and then during the off season, we've got Hot Stove and then Cactus Report during spring, and so yeah, it gets pretty busy. I'm hoping maybe not this year, but maybe this year getting to number 1,000 on Mariners Pod, which is pretty exciting.
That's a
That's a
feat.
lot. So we'll see if we get there or not. But it's been really fun. It's kind of evolved through the years and changed as I've done it, but I really enjoy doing it. Sometimes it gets difficult with travel and the games and everything else. Like there's more stuff I'd love to do, but at some point time becomes the issue sometimes, as you can imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, if you're watching this episode, go check out Mariners Pod, also the Wheelhouse with Jerry Dipoto. You've probably already listened to those shows, but I love those hot stove episodes because you're able to jam pack so many different interviews, and it's all with some of the guys that you want to hear from the most, like Kevin Seitzer this offseason with some of the top prospects coming up. I guess let's start right there with some of those conversations with those hot stove episodes. What were some of the big takeaways and key points that you might have taken away from that?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned those. And it's really been kind of a journey for me. Those episodes have really taught me a lot because, as you talked about, those are really long conversations. And some of those conversations, not everything makes the air. And we have some talk before and after we record. It ends
Mhm.
up being super valuable for us, just in terms of kind of learning if we're talking to a player, kind of learning about a guy and really getting a sense of knowing them. And for Kevin Seitzer, who I've never talked to before, a chance to really get to know him and talk to him and talk about his philosophy and everything. So I really enjoy those conversations, and we've kind of taken them into the regular season. Where we're lucky enough to be with the team all the time, and guys will sit down with us for 20, 30 minutes before a game, which is super valuable. And I hope people find it as valuable as we do, because I feel like in a 5-minute conversation, it's really hard. It feels like once you're finally getting somewhere and it's starting to get good, and then it's over already. So I love the in depth. And starting with Kevin Seitzer, it was really interesting to just talk it through. Kind of, he's someone that's obviously been in the game. He's a lifer. He's been at it forever. But from the coaching side of things and how he looks at hitting, especially for someone that's been in the game so long, and hitting has evolved so much and it's changed so much in the data and everything else. And a couple of things from our conversation with Kevin Seitzer specifically that really I locked in on. One is, it's so interesting. All the different hitters. Think about all the hitters he's coached, all the hitters he's seen, and he's been so impressed with the fact that no two swings are ever alike. All swings are completely different. It's like no snowflakes, right? Everything's different, and it just really struck me in talking to him how much he understands everybody's different. Every swing is different. Every skill set is different. And you kind of have to meet the hitter where they are. Like, teams can have an overarching philosophy. I mean, that's a good thing, but how you talk to a guy, how you teach it, what works for them, it's all kind of different. And I think what's exciting when you look at how things are set up this year between Edgar Martinez and Kevin Seitzer and Bobby Magianis, there's three different guys there that can help connect to different players. And we've already heard about Edgar and Julio, but you're hoping to find connection points between the other three guys with the rest of the roster.
Absolutely. And as you described, those 3, 4 guys that all have the same type of philosophy. I'll also shout out Seattle Sports 710. They just had on Kevin Seitzer on their program, and I heard a story of Kevin and his interview process with the Seattle Mariners. He was let go by the Braves. He was with the Braves for the better part of a decade. Extremely good hitting organization in the Braves, and he wasn't sure if he was going to be continuing with coaching. He wanted to, but whenever the right call happens, it happens. And the Mariners front office called. He goes and starts interviewing with the Mariners and with Edgar Martinez, and they're basically saying the exact same thing back and forth. And Edgar's philosophy is exactly the same philosophy that Seitzer has, and that's one of the things that I'm the most excited for heading into this year. If you believe that that last 6 weeks of this regular season of last year were real or not, I think what they bring to the table and the approach that they have is going to bring such a big change, and a positive change, to where it's not the over analyzing. It's about staying up the middle of the field, be aggressive for the fastball, first pitch, and those things. Really excited for what Seitzer has to bring, as well as Bobby Magianis. And they're super deep into watching the film and watching all of the little things, but then working directly with the player and how to relay that information to them in the best way.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. I mean, it's clear as we watch the evolution the past few years, what was happening offensively just wasn't working. And with the combo of, you talk about the last 6 weeks, one of the biggest differences was the lineup was better too. Like, Rosarena was part of that group, and Robles was part of that group, and they're going to be here from the beginning this year. I thought Justin Turner was a big factor last year. You kind of hope that Solano can step into that role and be what he was, and maybe even a little bit more. Who knows? But you kind of look at the opening day lineup last year compared to the opening day lineup this year, and there's a lot to be excited about. I think they're more athletic. I think they have the chance to be better, and then combine that with the philosophy side. I am excited to see where it goes, because as we've talked about so many times, it's the same situation in that they don't have to be a top five offense, right? They can just be a consistent, productive offense, but they don't have to be the best offense in baseball to get where they want to go, given the pitching staff, especially the rotation. They just have to be consistently better. And I think they have a chance to be consistently better, because one of the things that really stood out about the last 6 weeks last year is, they got a big lift from Robles, obviously. But like, Randy Rosarena didn't tear the cover off the ball, but look at the difference between his productivity, like especially his on base percentage, compared to what they were getting before. And if they can, because they struggled so much early in the year, I thought they had there's four different spots at times that were really struggling. If you can just be close to average in some spots, but do it up and down the lineup, and then when you have the big productivity from Cal and guys like that, it can really carry you forward if you can just plug the rest of the holes and at least be, you don't have to have all stars, you don't have to be great in every position. Just be good to decent up and down, and that can go a long ways.
Absolutely. You just have to be like a top half, hopefully, and you'll be in a great spot with that pitching depth. A stat from a Seattle Times article on talking through this spring training so far and why it's important to not look too deep into the spring training numbers, but to just look at the overall, service level of what's going on. The Mariners' last spring training apparently led Major League Baseball in runs scored with 6.3 runs scored in spring training last year, but then we all know what happened immediately following. So, when you're watching spring training games, we saw they lost to the Rockies, to the White Sox. Of course, there's prospects playing. There's endless amounts of pitchers going into the game. I guess what are some of the takeaways that you've seen so far from some of those key guys that we might not have seen last year?
Yeah, so it's a good disclaimer. Spring training records, spring training stats, they don't matter. Like, the Mariners could go winless in spring training, and to me, that would have no bearing on how the season would go. And conversely, the Mariners could go undefeated in spring training, and to me, it wouldn't change my mind about the team or really have any bearing on the season. And same with stats. And the reason I say that is when you watch a spring play out, you just realize how utterly random the whole thing is. Because, like the other day, the Mariners are playing the Dodgers, right? Blake Snell is starting. So the first, I don't know, five, six guys in the order are facing Blake Snell. Blake Snell leaves after the first inning, and a guy who's probably going to start the year in Double A comes on next. So the bottom half of the order is facing a guy who's going to be at Double A. I mean, it's that kind of thing
Right.
consistently throughout. And then you throw in the sun and the wind and the conditions, and it's just so random. You can't put any stock into stats. Now, there are interesting things that happen during games, and that to me is where I find the interest in the games. Like, man, when Logan Gilbert comes out against the Rockies and is throwing 98, 97, and he's mixing his breaking stuff in and looking sharp as can be, same with Bryce Miller. It's like they look great. In a lot of ways, spring to me feels more old school, where you end up saying, wow, he looked really great. I mean, we do have some more analytics than we used to. Like, Peoria used to forever not have any Statcast numbers, and now Mariners Home Park does have Statcast numbers. Not everywhere does in spring, so it's more helpful in that way that we kind of get some data along the way. But the to me the stories that kind of stick out and what I've seen in games, the starters have all looked great, and to me the biggest key for spring, the most important thing for the Mariners, is just have the starters go out, get their work in, leave the game, come out the next time, do the same thing, trying to keep them all healthy. That's the biggest thing. To me, it's been a great sign to see Gabe Spire so far. He was blowing 96, 97 his first start. You love seeing that velo back because, as we've talked about it before, I think finding the consistent guys at the back end of the bullpen is a huge key because the back end of the bullpen struggled last year, and it was a factor for the Mariners last year not making the postseason. And I think Brash is certainly going to help. That's obvious. You hope Santos is part of that mix, but you think about what Gabe Spire did 2 years ago, and if he could get close to that this year, I mean, that goes a long way. And they're still, I'm always interested with the Mariners now. Like, every bullpen guy they sign or bring in, it's like, okay, what can he be? So I kind of tend to look at all those guys
Mhm.
as just, okay, what do we got here? And there's a few interesting guys in camp that I'm keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, working right off of that, let's start with some of those guys. I made a video talking about 11 guys that the Mariners might be able to use out of the bullpen, including some guys that were former great names and Drew Pomeranz, Neftali Feliz. You got Shintaro Fujinami, who's this flamethrower that had the success in Japan. He's got up to 103, but as we saw, I believe yesterday, he can have times to where he doesn't even know where the ball's going.
Yeah.
And then all the way up to like Hunter Cranton, who was a third round draft pick last year out of Kansas. He was their closer who brings electric stuff. There's a lot of high upside guys that can fill out the back end of the bullpen. And then you also have guys coming back like Matt Brash, Jackson Kowar eventually. You got Carlos Vargas, who's an opportunity there. Who are some of those other names that you are looking at in the bullpen as that might really help out? And then also, have you seen the Munoz kick change?
Oh, so I have not seen it in person yet. It happened. It's so funny. The hardest thing about spring training for us is, uh, or one of the hardest things is, we're doing the games. So there's like, for people that have never been at spring training before, like everyone doesn't go to the games in terms of players and whatnot. Like the players playing and the backups, like they'll go to the games, but there's always work going on back at the facility. So while we're calling the game, like Munoz was throwing the kick change. So some things, because we're involved in the game, we just miss. Like I saw the video, which is great, and I heard from Munoz about it. And I was talking to Trent Blank a few days ago. He's got, I think, a list of 13 to 15 new pitches in camp, which is always really exciting. And,
New pitches.
realistically, yeah, new guys working on different pitches. And
Wow.
realistically, like a bunch of those will never see the light of day. Like he
Yeah.
calls them, I think, side projects or hobbies, things like that. And which is fine because, they Mariners have a culture now of always trying to expand and get better. And, sometimes things just don't work. But then there's the Bryce Millers and Logan Gilberts of the world where they add pitches and it becomes game changers, like
Hmm.
career changing, right? They've taken huge leaps. So you mentioned Fujinama, for example. He is adding a two seam because they feel like perhaps he can control it better. He used it his last time out, and it's going to be a work in progress. But I'm always curious to see where pitches like that go. Uh, so there's a bunch of interesting guys in camp, bullpen wise. I think one of them to really pay attention to is the ex Gonzaga closer, Casey Lugamina, who's
Hmm.
pitched a couple times now. And, it's the kind of thing where his name kept coming up in my conversations. And then I've seen him a couple times and it's like, oh, you get it right away because it
Yeah.
looks familiar. You
Yep.
watch the way he throws and his arm angle, and it's like, yeah, that's Paul Sewald esque.
That's a
Tyson Miller
Mariner.
to in camp last year. It's the same kind of thing. And I know they're working with him on some slider too, but you see the way he throws, and it's pretty good stuff too. Like he was throwing 94, 95 with that. Really deceptive. And you just watch him and it's like, yeah, that can play. And I don't know if he'll break camp with the team, but he feels like a guy that's going to be a factor in the Mariners bullpen. So he's someone I'm watching. I'm excited to see Cranton. You just mentioned for the first time. He's not been in a game yet. I think he's on the schedule. I think right before the off day. I think he's scheduled to pitch in a game, at least on the list. So I'm super thrilled to see him. It's always harder, because when camp breaks, it's always a game of you're trying to keep as much talent as possible. So the young guys that have options are probably less likely to make a team, and the veterans that don't have a lot of flexibility more likely, unless they just blow
Hmm.
you away. Brandon Garcia is a guy that we should probably mention along those lines. Like, I'm super excited about him, and the Mariners are really excited about him. We've seen him a couple times, and that stuff really plays out of the bullpen. I don't know if he's going to make it opening day, but he seems like a guy that's going to pitch this year for the Mariners and be a factor for the Mariners this year. So those are probably the two. Casey and Garcia kind of stand out for me.
Yeah, definitely agree. And Brandon Garcia being a lefty, I would imagine that he has a good shot at some point, like you mentioned. There's only Gabe Spire and Taylor Saucedo that are coming from the
Yeah.
left side. Everyone else is from the right side, so it definitely would play to have some depth from the left side there. Looks like Doris Valdez was released today. The Mariners also sent Hunter Cranton and a couple other guys to minor league camp to start thinning stuff out. So I guess with that, it's like if Cranton's sent to minor league camp right now, can they just call him up whenever for an appearance in a game if they want to?
Yeah, that's kind of irrelevant. In fact, it's
Okay.
funny. Like today, for example, the Mariners are playing the Rockies, and Cleveland was one of the guys sent out today, and he pitched in today's game. So
Okay.
those guys can always come back. Like Seleston, for example, he's not in Major League camp, but we've seen it a number of times already. So they
Right.
just are continually borrowing guys from minor league camp when they need them. Now, you need less of that as you move on, as regulars play a little bit longer and starters throw a little bit longer. You need less bodies and less players, so you'll see fewer of that, except on days where there's a split squad. But yeah, anyone can play at any time. So it's kind of on paper move, and at that point they won't make the opening day roster, but you'll still see them in spring games.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's start right, or let's keep there with the farm system and some of those prospects that we've been seeing. Colt Emerson, guy is a dude. He's 19 years old, but he's putting together major league at bats. Just today, he put together a 14 pitch at bat,
Yeah,
and
14.
Julio Rodriguez had like a 12 pitch at bat right after him. I heard from you guys on the radio that Colt hit one down the left field line that was the distance of a home run. The next pitch down the right field line that was the distance of a home run. He's made some stellar plays at shortstop. There's been a couple errors there, but
Yeah.
he's got the tools. What are your initial takeaways from Colt?
Yeah, you see the talent, and it just I continually have to remind myself he's 19 because he
It's
doesn't
insane.
play like it. He doesn't play like it, and he doesn't look like it when you're watching him on the field. 19, it's wild, but you can see it. It's really easy to see, and it feels like he's going to be here soon, just because of the skill set and the package. And you talk to him, and he gets it. Uh, Mariner fans should be super excited about him. And he's a sponge too, which is great. Like I love, I walk out there and he's just talking to Perry Hill and soaking it all in. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you love to see. That's what you want your 19-year-old to do. Like, talk to guys. And when he's in major league camp, like have the conversations and learn. And it's been really fun to see him. Uh, he's really stood out. Laz, of course, has really stood out in camp. I mean, a couple of home runs, the joy, the excitement. He's enormous. I mean, he looks like a major leaguer right now. He's got the
Yeah.
major league body for it, but he's really stood out. Feline has been fun to watch too because he's a guy that just hasn't played a lot because of injury. And for me, this is one of the fun things about spring is I get to watch guys that I talk about and hear about and talk to, but never get a chance to really see play. So watching Felnine run around, and man, you can see the talent there too. Like, it's going to take time for these guys, obviously, but you can just see the talent and see that they belong here. They belong in the major leagues. And those guys, in terms of the young core, have really stood out for me so far. And Arroyo too. I should say Arroyo. He's been really good. And I know, I feel like Arroyo gets a little overlooked sometimes, especially on the infield because Cole Young and Cole Emerson. I feel
Mhm.
like garner most of the attention, but there's a lot of excitement about who Arroyo can be and the hitter he can be. He's out of camp for the next few days because he's playing with Team Columbia that's trying to qualify for the World Baseball Classic next season. So they're playing in
Oh,
Tucson
that's
a few
awesome.
games. So yeah, so he's there playing, which will be fun, and then he'll be back. But he's been impressive too, so he shouldn't get lost in the shuffle.
Absolutely. No, the talent is off the charts. Colt Emerson, I mean, I think he's going to debut next year at 20 years old, and it's
Yeah.
going to be ridiculous. Same thing with, I mean, Lazaro Montes. He's right there behind Colt in age. I think Lazaro's the third youngest in camp. I think Colt might be the youngest guy in camp. Um, and with Lazaro right now, he's an outfielder. I would imagine that at some point they would shift him to like a first base DH. Where do you see Lazaro long term?
That's a good question because I don't feel like I've seen him enough in the outfield to judge. Like he's been fine from what I've seen, but he hasn't. I don't feel like he's seen a ton of action. So in the little I've seen him, like he moves around pretty well, which is great. Uh, but I don't know. It's too soon for me to judge. But the bat certainly plays, and if you hit, they'll find a space for you no matter what. But it would be valuable if he could stick in the outfield, and I know that's something he takes pride in and works at. So we'll see if that's possible or not.
A couple other bats to mention: Ben Williamson. I've seen highlights of him at third base in spring training so far. His glove can play at the major league level right now. How
Mhm.
soon do you think we might see Ben Williamson?
That's a really good question. I think the you make a great point. I think he could play defense at the big league level right now. His defense is incredible. Yeah, and we've seen it a little bit in spring training, but from all the conversations I've had with people around, like everyone raves about the kind of defender he is at third base. So that's not the question. Like the bat, how soon will the bat come? He had a good year last year, so can he build off that? And for me, when a guy gets to double A at this point, they're in range, no matter the age, no matter their experience. So you never know how a season's going to play out. You never know how the injury situation is going to play out. And given his defense, especially if, the rest of the lineup is solid and producing, like you could afford to have a defensive guy at third base and just let him do what he does offensively. But it's a good question. I think with Williamson, it may be depend on circumstance when we see him for the first time at the major league level. But the defense is real.
And speaking to circumstance, the third baseman for this year is Jorge Polanco. We haven't seen him out there on the field yet. Is there any updates on where Polanco's at?
He's getting close. He's doing work, so he's on the field and working at the position. He's working with Perry Hill. We just haven't seen him in a game yet. Dan Wilson said yesterday that we'll see him soon. So I imagine we'll see him in the next few days. Hopefully, we do. Like for veterans, I don't get that concerned because we still are a ways away from opening day. But this is a new position, so it would be good for him to get on the field and see some action there. They do have a little more coverage, I think, with Solano. We saw him at third again, but a veteran guy. And this is where I think Solano had a little advantage over Justin Turner is Solano's a guy that can't play third. Like last year with the Padres, he basically split time three ways between first, third, and DH. And he filled in for Machado a bunch during the season last year. So like I don't think you want him there for 3 months in a row playing third. But hey, if you start the season, a couple of weeks, a month, whatever, like he's a guy that can handle himself at third base. So they do have some coverage there if Polanco is slow on getting back. But there's still plenty of time. So at this point, I don't have a lot of concern.
Yeah. One of the other question marks in the infield was second base heading into this offseason. And there's been speculation that Dylan Moore might be given the opportunity to have an everyday role at second base, the first Mariners player to win the utility gold glove. There's also Ryan Bliss that is fighting for an opportunity. There's Cole Young that's right there. What are your thoughts on the second base position and who we might see there?
Yeah, I think it's still wide open. I mean, we will see Dylan there, especially against lefties. I feel like that's a natural spot for him to be. The question is, will we see him there every single day? And I don't think we have the answer to that yet. Cole Young is interesting. I think he's got a chance to be the guy. And maybe not to start the season. Maybe it's during the course of the season. That being said, we have not seen Cole Young on the field yet in spring training. He's been exclusively a DH when he's played in games. He's dealing with a sore arm, so he just has not been on the field yet playing second base. So hopefully,
Mhm.
those are the kind of two we're waiting on now that Solano's back in camp. We're kind of waiting on Polanco, and we're kind of waiting on Cole Young to get on the field and see how that goes. But between those three guys, I still feel like it's wide open for plate appearances, and it's the kind of thing where if you hit, you'll grab it. And whoever comes out of the gates as the second baseman, if they hit out of the gates, like they're going to play. It's going to be a job where it could be a little in flux during the course of the season, and maybe they play the hot hand. But I still think it's in flux and wide open. So I don't think we're close to an answer there on what it's going to look like day to day.
Yeah, we still got close to a month of spring training, so there's still a lot to play out.
And part
And
of
then
it is
speaking, yeah,
Yeah, part of it's Dylan is so valuable moving around. I mean, it
right.
is unique to have. We talk about utility guys a lot, and you know, you can have guys stand in different places, right? Which some guys are utility guys that can just move around, but Dylan is really a plus defender in a lot of different places, and that's pretty rare. Like a guy that can handle himself at shortstop and left field and center field and all these different places. And that's really valuable. And of course, if he's playing second every day, that kind of takes away some of his value and versatility. Although I'm sure he'd love to play every day. So, but from a Mariners perspective, that's something to keep in mind moving forward too.
And like in his Gold Glove speech, that's his role. That's what he takes pride in. And as long as he's in the lineup every day, that's what matters to him. I'm making a player profile on him right now. He went to University of Central Florida, and yeah, he came up as a shortstop, as you might imagine. One of the best athletes on the field is always the shortstop. But he, over time, learned those different positions, even playing first base last year. So
Hmm.
yeah, extremely valuable right there. And then the other question mark in the infield is first base. You got the platoon and Donovan Solano. You got Luke Raley. They also brought in a bopper and Rowdy Telez. What have you seen from him, and what are your thoughts on that base?
I'm curious how this plays out. It feels like a Rayleigh and Solano platoon to me, but the wild card of like all these conversations, including first bases, there are DH at bats to be had. There is not a solution right now. I mean, you can say, hey, maybe Garver's a guy that takes more DH plate appearances, like the plan was last year. Like he's someone that could play into that. But you could map out a scenario where Telez could be part of a platoon situation as a DH and maybe seeing some time at first base. But when I think about Telez, for example, like I don't think it's just isolated to first. I think DH is part of that mix. And Rayleigh's a guy that could move and get DH plate appearances, and same with Solano. So I think that's DH is the one spot where it gives the Mariners flexibility to keep another one, keep a Telez on the roster because there are plate appearances for someone that's going to be productive, and I'm curious to see where the Garver thing goes as well because, I'm optimistic that he's going to have a bounce back this year. I don't know what that will look like. Like, is he going to bounce back to where he was 2 years ago? That's the part I'm not sure. I think he's going to be better offensively this year. I just don't know, like how big of a bounce back it's going to be. Is he going to bounce back to the point where, hey, we got to have his bat in the lineup every day as the DH, and then you maybe figure out a different backup catcher, or is he going to be, hey, he's the backup catcher, and he's always hit lefties pretty well, so he's going to DH or catch against lefties, like I don't know. There's a lot of moving parts to this whole thing, to be honest, and a lot of these questions won't be answered on opening day. Like we'll move through the season, but there are opportunities to be had, and it's really just going to be if you hit, you'll be in the lineup for some of these spots.
And between the two Mitches, they're committed to $28 million this year between Mitch Haniger and Mitch Garver. How many at bats and how frequent of at bats do you see with Mitch Haniger getting this year?
That's the trick because the outfield looks set, right?
Oh yeah.
Barring injury, like you're rolling with the three in the outfield with Randy and Julio and Robles, and I think you feel pretty good about that. And we can talk about Robles a little bit more because he's
And you
super
also
interesting.
have Moore and Rayleigh that could play out there as well.
That could
So
play out there as well. Yeah, so there's a lot of outfield coverage, but again, the DH spot, it keeps coming back to me. So a guy like Mitch Haniger, a guy like Rowdy Telez, like there are plate appearances there if you can be productive. Not all of these guys are going to make the roster out of camp though. That's going to be the question. And so who do they believe has the possibility to be the most productive? Haniger's weird too because you would expect for him to hit lefties, and last year he didn't hit lefties. So if you're looking at a platoon situation as a DH and you need Haniger to hit lefties, will he hit lefties this year? I mean, that's one of the open questions too. So maybe it's the Telez Haniger platoon at DH. Like, there's a lot of different ways that could go, but just because there aren't plate appearances in the outfield, the DH spot is always there for plate appearances for somebody to grab, and it could be Haniger, could be Telez, could be a number of guys. I don't know.
and last year the Mitches combined both hit below 209. So we're
Yeah.
hoping for a bounce back for them. We're hoping that the new hitting philosophy rubs off on everybody else. Um, let's talk a little bit about Julio this spring and his approach at getting more at bats. We've heard about how Edgar Martinez back in his heyday would jump around between different minor league games and backfields to just get reps and ABs. What have you seen from Julio? Have you seen him putting in more work just across the board? Is he kind of going from field to field? What have you seen?
The Julio talked the other day, and I'd forgotten about this because it was a whole year ago. And honestly, when spring training ends, I think we all forget about spring training and the regular season's here, and here we go. But I've forgotten that Julio was slowed last spring with injury, and really, he had an abbreviated spring essentially. He wasn't able to get these kind of at bats that he's getting here, and it was interesting to hear and something I had forgotten about because he's able to do whatever he wants to do. You get ready for the season this spring, and I think that's only going to help him. And he is a guy like it's not. I was kind of surprised to see him in the lineup today, for example, on the road against Colorado, and he only took, I think he only took two at bats, and then was gone. But that's the kind of thing where, hey, he's in an extra game here that he probably last year would have never been in. Even with healthy, he probably never would have been in. So it's that kind of situation where, yeah, he's facing Marquez too, who's a legit major league guy, and he's getting a couple plate appearances off him. His first double was pretty impressive too. It was like 111 off the bat down the right field
Yep.
line, which is pretty great. So that's the kind of thing. It's like there's always backfield work and that sort of thing, but he is getting more plate appearances than you would already expect this time of spring.
How has his we see that Victor Robles came in with bleached hair. You got Randy Rosarena and then Julio that followed up with doing the same thing. I mean, those three guys in the outfield are absolutely electric, and the energy that they bring to camp.
Yeah.
How has this spring training looked with those three guys kind of leading the way?
So I was talking to Victor Robles the other day, and he called. Just so you know, this is great. We asked him the color of his hair, and he calls it cinnamon. So
Cinnamon.
cinnamon colored hair, which is great. He's phenomenal. Like he is really fun to be around. He's exactly what we see on the field. You know how he's just high
So much
energy.
energy.
Yeah, it looks like, when he was with the Mariners last year, it looked like he was just having the time of his life. Like just so fun. But that's the way he is all over the place. And which is great because I felt like last year he really not only was he super productive, which really helps. Like September, he was a top 5 outfielder in baseball, which is great, but just so much energy and life and injected kind of chaos into situations, with the way he would run and lay down bunts for hits and do all these different things that they weren't doing for so much of the season. And they're all such different people, Julio, Randy, and Robles, but they really have a connection and they really mesh. And I am really excited to see what a full year looks like of those three. And I'm really interested in Robles because I think it's too much to to ask him to be the guy he was in the final month last season for a whole season because he was legit one of the best outfielders in baseball. And I don't think we can assume he's going to be that for the full season. But I do think he can be a really productive guy for the Mariners during the course of the season, given his age, his prospect pedigree, his talent, his I don't know how much he really enjoys the situation. Talking to him, it really made a difference for him when he got to Seattle. The Mariners said, "Just be yourself," and that's who they got because they're all human beings. And I think about Victor Robles in Washington, and he had so much expectation on him. He was compared to Soto that whole time
Right.
because he was a prospect who was thought of like Juan Soto. And over those amount of years, I can't imagine what that would feel like and how draining that could be at times. And it felt like watching him in Seattle that he was a guy that in some ways was just set free. And that's kind of the way he played. So I'm curious what that looks like through the course of the year. And I'm excited about Randy Rosarena because I think I think he has been a really productive bat in the majors. And I think he can be a really productive bat for the Mariners. And honestly, they need him to be. like he's going to hit in the middle of the order, and they need him to be a productive bat. I think he can be.
Perennial 2020 guy. But going back to Robles, kind of as you described, I can only imagine the weight that he felt being in Washington. Looking back at the MLB prospect rankings right now, 2019, number 4 overall prospect in baseball. And he did not live up to that whatsoever throughout his time in Washington. He dealt with various injuries, setbacks. He is finally let go. The Mariners pick him up, bring him into a lineup that is already in the contending picture, that has a lot of fun guys in the clubhouse already. He doesn't have that pressure. He's just another guy. He's not the guy. And he's just able to be himself, and he absolutely goes off. Looking at his splits, as you described, September, October, over 22 games, 389 batting average, 465 on base percentage, an OPS of 993. What's surprising for me is that his platoon splits, he hit righties quite a bit more better than lefties. Versus right-handed pitching, he had 192 plate appearances, a 343 batting average, 407 on base, 901 OPS against righties. Against lefties, 103 plate appearances, 239 batting average, 330 on base, 648 OPS. So if he could just replicate even a portion of what he did last year, that's going to be massive.
Well, and talking about his talent and it matters because guys can have a great month, right? But the reason it gives you hope that he could get be productive and be somewhat in the world of that again is his talent level. Like he's a really talented guy, and you could map out a scenario where he could be productive for an entire season. And he fits the park really well, which I think is important. Like he's a guy that he hits line drives down the line for doubles. He nearly led the team in doubles, which is pretty amazing when you look at his
Wow.
short time. And because the Mariners were a team that didn't hit doubles last year, and we know that the gaps can get gobbled up at T-Mobile Park. But he's not a guy that relies on flying the gaps for his extra base hits. Like he's down the line, he uses his speed. He's just a good fit for the park, and they needed more good fits for the park, and he's certainly one of them.
Yeah, it looks like he hit 20 doubles in his 77 games. Um, yeah, and then if you could add 30 to 50 stolen bases on the
Yeah,
stat line, I
yeah.
mean, batting leadoff,
Yeah, you
and
take
then
that
to
all.
add absolutely. And to add to what you said with the Rosarena, I saw an interview that he did the other day. Two pieces to it. One is that he's been kind of a mentor to Lazaro Montes. Both of them are from Cuba. So he's kind of taken him under his wing. But then also Randy, he was traded from the Rays. He was with the Rays his entire time on the East Coast. He's always been an East Coast guy. So completely changing his lifestyle, coming to the West Coast. Victor and also Julio helped him out. But
Mhm.
Randy to be able to have his feet under himself for this next season to where he knows what to expect and he's more comfortable with all these guys. He also trained with Gary Sheffield in the offseason. He could have another solid season and even a more of a 2023 season than a 24 season.
It's the hard thing that fans don't get to see. It's the real the human part of like a mid-season trade, like out of the blue. Like Tampa has been his home. That's where his family's lived. And I don't know if you remember that last game where he was traded. He actually went to the ballpark and was in the stands in
Yeah.
the outfield and you kind of hanging out before leaving. And that's been his home forever. And fans loved him. They embraced him. And there is when you get dealt, especially from Tampa to Seattle, as we all know, it's one coast to the other. That's pretty far. There are so many things that are happening all at once, and a lot of them involve family. And what are we going to do? Are you coming with me? And it can involve kids and school, and there are a million things going on. And you're going to a team that it's usually a team in a playoff chase, and they need you to be productive, and you're trying to prove yourself to new teammates. And it's funny. You look at, I've read a couple of studies on this. Swing rates go up for guys with new that go to new teams, whether it's free agency or midseason trades.
Makes
Swing
sense.
rates go up because they're human beings. They're trying to prove themselves. You trade for guys and they want to come and show why you traded for they want to be great. They want to show the fans, everybody. So swing rate goes up, chase rate usually goes up. So I'm excited about all those things for year two for Randy. I mean, not full year two, but you know what I mean. He was around
Mhm.
last year, but more settled situation because the human part thing is so hard, and some guys can take off and be great, but it's a challenge. It's a real challenge.
Absolutely. And we just briefly touched on some of the rotation and some of some of the new pitching. Let's get into more of the starting rotation. What's wild is that as I was looking at these stats coming into tonight, what if I told you that Luis Castillo, the Rock, La Piedra, had the highest ERA, the highest WHIP out of the entire rotation? I mean, you got Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, Bryce Miller. Just speaking on Bryce Miller for a second, he came into the league. He graduated college as a pitcher with two pitches, a fastball and a slider. He's confirmed now that he has seven pitches,
Mm-hmm.
and himself and George Kirby have added cutters. Logan Gilbert has a cutter, I believe, and also he's working on a sinker again. Just the level of gain that these guys have had in their short time in the big league so far. Luis Castillo is kind of a five now when you look at the ceiling of these guys. What are your takeaways from those guys?
Yeah, the Bryce Miller thing is wild. Given look back 2 years, look back when he was drafted, and he was a guy when he was drafted that there was thought that he'd be a bullpen guy
Hmm.
because of his two pitches and be a successful
No
bullpen guy.
experience.
But yeah, and then he's now to a point where I don't know what his ceiling is. I don't think anyone knows what his ceiling is at this point. I'm super excited to see what his year looks like. Like he has done a bunch of stuff that's not normal. Like picking up pitches mid-season, taking it into the game and dominating with them, that is not a normal thing. The more normal thing is what we're talking about earlier, all these different guys trying out pitches in spring training. That's normal. You work on it, maybe you try it in a game. What Bryce Miller does is not. It's abnormal and it's amazing. So uh, I don't know what to expect this year. I really don't. Like I'm really excited about him, but I don't know where this is going to go. I think George Kirby is sitting on a Logan Gilbert year from last year. And I felt going into last year that Gilbert was going to put it together because I felt like the previous year he had pitched better than his numbers looked. And I thought Logan would put it together and he had the kind of year that I thought he was going to have. That's what I think is going to happen with Kirby this year. I think Kirby pitched better than his surface numbers looked. And I think he's on the cusp of putting it all together and taking that leap forward. Not that he hasn't been, I mean, he's already been an all star. He's already been really consistent. I mean, look at his year last year, but he had 3.5 ERA. He threw almost 200 innings, 33 starts. Like he's doing all this great stuff that you would take from just about anybody. But I think we all feel like there's another level. And we were talking to Trent Blank the other day, and he even mentioned that Kirby wasn't thrilled with his year last year, but that tells you the kind of competitor he is, right? And that he just wants to be great. So I'm excited to see where he goes. And you mentioned the Castillo thing. It's so funny because I feel like he has moved himself into an underrated category, and part of it is the rotation he's part of. Because I feel like Castillo is super consistent. Like you almost know what you're going to get every time. It's like 6 innings, 2 runs, or 6 innings, 3 runs. Like you look at
Hmm.
his game log last year, and it's that just about every time. That should not be taken for granted. And sometimes I feel like Castillo is taken for granted a little bit. And, it's part because he's in this incredible group. If Castillo was, I don't know, a starter with the White Sox, he'd probably stand out a little bit more and just how consistent and good he is. But that stuff is hard to come by. Just the consistency and knowing what you're going to get. And I think we'll see more of that. Like he's a guy that's not working on new pitches. He's not going to change, but I think he is who he is at this point. He's aging, but he's aging really gradually. Like he's been a good pitcher for a long time, and I think he's going to continue to be a good pitcher. And if he ends the year with the highest ERA again, they should be in really good shape, I would think.
Absolutely. And actually, so Logan Gilbert was on Seattle Sports 710 for an interview, and he talked about Luis Castillo. And there's the whole story of, once he made the All Star game, he put a nice watch in his locker and he didn't tell anyone. He didn't do it in front of anyone. But also, Castillo was watching one of Logan Gilbert's bullpens one day, and Gilbert was a bit frustrated with something. And Castillo just walked up to him and he was like, just stay the same. Like,
Mm.
just don't change anything. Just be yourself. And like Castillo is so calm, cool, and collected. He doesn't show, I mean, he shows some emotion up there, but he just seems like the most level guy out there. And like you mentioned, his stats reflect that.
He is. There's no one in the world better at shaking off something that goes wrong than Luis Castillo, which in baseball is about the greatest gift you can have, especially as a pitcher, because things are going to go wrong. You're going to walk dudes, you're going to give up big home runs, and oftentimes you got to get the next guy. I mean, maybe the game's tied now, or maybe you're still up one, or whatever. And I have never seen a dude just be able to like nothing ever happened. Just move on to the next. It's so amazing. Yeah, the mental side of this game I think is incredible in general. Like, the amount of failure, especially for hitters, but also for pitchers. And the way it comes for pitchers, it is just so on the spotlight, like out in the open. Like you just gave up a 3-run home run in front of 40,000 people.
Bat
And
flip.
yeah, and you get the ball back and you got to go get the next guy. Like you got to put that away right now because you got to go back to work. Like that stuff I find amazing. And with hitters, the fact that they could go up and fail, 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 and still stay confident, especially now with the stuff we're seeing, the mental side, it's a whole different level. Like if I was, well, I fail a lot, but it's I would just crumble. Like it wouldn't go well.
All stars fail 7 times out of 10
Yeah.
on the hitting front.
Yeah.
To add some additional notes to Bryce to start. So as you mentioned, he learned some pitches in season. He learned the knuckle curve from Mike Bowman,
Yeah.
and there was a start. It was against the White Sox, I think, and he threw it like 6 times in a row or something like that. And you look at his August and September, October numbers. August, he allowed a 175 batting average against, a 206 on base percentage against, a 536 OPS. In September, 5 starts, a 158 batting average allowed, 254 on base percentage, 492 OPS. And then, as we mentioned, he's coming into this season with the cutter added as well. And he's the more that I've heard him talk about it, I think he's very similar to George Kirby in that they just both completely get like the physics of baseball and how to make a ball move exactly how you want it to. It's like, oh, okay, if I put pressure here, grip the ball on this seam, it's going to do this, and they're able to like in game make those adjustments and be able to just make the pitches move however they want. And so he has 7 pitches. He could adjust each of those 7 pitches a little bit to do it to make it how he wants, and I think that's just incredibly unique. Um, and with Kirby, with him taking the next step, it's really expanding his zone slightly to where he can increase his strikeout rate, so that he's not living quite as much in the zone. But in another wild stat, I mentioned the whole Luis Castillo highest ERA and WHIP thing. What's another wild stat is that Brian Wu had a lower walks per nine than George Kirby. And George Kirby has a historic ability to command the strike zone and to throw strikes, but Brian Wu had a 1 walks per 9 innings, which is better than George Kirby, albeit 121 in a third innings. Brian Wu is about to have a big year as well.
The Wu thing I am so fascinated by. 'Cause if we turn back the clock going into last year, Wu and Miller both had a similar issue is that lefties got to both of them. And what Miller did, he's just overhauled all the stuff and he developed new weapons to attack lefties. For Wu, it was just kind of double down on the fastballs, the four seam and two seam, and just be super aggressive with them. What stood out about Wu is remember that stretch where he was on a pitch count and he was still getting into the sixth inning with like, there were times he had like a 75 pitch count and he was just rolling into the sixth with it. It was just remarkable to see how aggressive he is with his fastball. And it worked. Guys, just, it is so unique. Guys have such a tough time picking it up, and you can see it. You can see the swings on it. And it, his story is just, the whole thing's remarkable, from his college career to the draft to his rise here so quickly and the year he put together last year. Like, I'm really excited to see where that goes. And what I'm hoping for more than anything, remember Wu didn't start last year with the big club. It was Hancock that started in the rotation. I just, more than anything, want to see this rotation get to opening day all healthy and all ready to go to take the ball the first 5 times of the season. That's what I want more than anything in the spring, because I just want to see what this looks like for start after start after start from the beginning of the season, because I do feel like the Mariners need to get off to a good start, and having those 5 guys healthy and throwing is the best way to make that happen.
That's another thing that I'm very encouraged by is the dialogue coming from the players right now. It's like they've been one game short the past 2 years, and they're not going to let that happen again. And they're stressing the importance of the March, April games and how everyone is so important. And Gilbert said it could be a random Tuesday in April that you have to get that game, and that could be the difference, later on in the year. So that's another big piece. And going back to Brian Wu for a second, I just did the filter search on Baseball Savant, and apparently he had the lowest walk rate in all of baseball last year, which I did not realize, but there we go. And he threw a variation of the fastball. He threw the four seam 50%. He threw the sinker 23%. So he's throwing the fastballs essentially 75% of the time, and it's good luck. And what I've heard about Brian Wu's fastball, it's coming out of the spigot, the water spout, kind of like the seawall stuff. And it's such an easy delivery to where it's deceptive in itself, because he's just low effort, 98 right by you.
Yeah, and it's just, he's just, come get it. And that's what he's
Yeah.
saying. Here it is, come get it. And you were talking to Trent Blank about it too, and about coming into this year, because I was curious, because Miller's made a lot of adjustments, obviously, which has worked great. And so my question was, hey, do you adjust with Wu? And he's like, no, you make baseball adjust to him first, and then he can start making adjustments after that, because it's working. So why change it right now if it's working? So this is good. The Wu that we saw last year is going to be the Wu that we see this year. And if he starts to get hit, if it doesn't start to work, there always is a next plan or adjustments to make after that. But no need to go down that road right now.
One more guy that I got to ask about. He could be in the rotation. He could be in the bullpen at some point sooner. He throws with both arms. It's Durangelo Saincha. I don't know if you've seen him yet, but there's been some footage of live ABs out of the backfield. He was up to 98 from the right side, up to 93 from the left side. Apparently, he was going like 2 batters righty, 2 batters lefty. So Ty Pete faced him both as a righty and a lefty, and he said it was completely trippy. Have you seen Durangelo or heard about how they might be approaching his development?
No, I know his last bullpen, again, was during one of our games, so I wasn't able to see it. He is one of the guys that I just want to see what that looks like. Because, I asked, when he goes through a bullpen, like, how does he do it? Does he go from the right side like 20 times and he just like throws a couple from the right, throws a couple from the left, and just kind of goes back and forth. I just want to see it. I just want to see
Yeah.
what it looks like. So I'm hoping to catch that before I go. I don't know if he's going to end up in a game or not. And I'm also curious to see where he starts this season. Like, he's pitched at a really high level, obviously in college last year, but even if he started in Everett, I would imagine he'd be a fast mover if he has success right out of the gates. But man, this is just so unique. We've never seen anything like this, because Vendetti, who of course threw with both arms, it wasn't with this kind of stuff. And And I just love that he was drafted by the Mariners too, because I feel like the Mariners can help really maximize what he is a pitcher as a pitcher. And I can't wait to see where this goes because there's there's nothing like it, nothing like this that we've seen.
And from what I've heard, SEC baseball, he went to Mississippi State. It's somewhat comparable to Double A,
Yeah.
or at least High A. So yeah, as you mentioned, likely if he did start it at High A, he would be in Double A before you know it. And that's where it's like, hey, some of these guys, you never know if they're going to be coming up next year, even if they were drafted last season, because if they have a fast progression, you have a unique guy like this out of the bullpen, that would be a complete pain for the opposing manager to have to deal with a bullpen guy that can throw from both sides. He's like, well, I've got righties and lefties lined up. I don't know what to do here.
I mean, that's exactly right. I'd love to see that play out. And I mean, honestly, when a guy gets to Double A, he's in range of a call up. We've seen it a million times, especially on the pitching side. Mariners do not hesitate from calling guys up from Double A. So once you're there, like you're within range. But for a lot of the young guys that we've talked about, I'm curious to see where they start this season. And Harry Ford, guys like that, like it's going to be really interesting to see where guys go. It's going to be a really fun minor league season too. Like there's a lot of talent in the minor league system, and they had a year last year where just about everybody excelled or had good seasons, which is pretty rare. Usually that doesn't happen. You have a top 10, a top 15, a top 20. There's a percentage of that that doesn't take a step forward or has injuries or struggles, but they didn't have a lot of that with their top guys last year. So we'll see where it goes this year with their
and
top
we'll
10,
see if
top 20.
and we'll see if that same wave of guys keeps winning championships at
Yeah.
each level that they go through. Because you had high A or low A Modesto won back to back championships, I believe, in the Cal League, and now
Mm-hmm.
that they're going to be in high A next year in Everett, so we'll see if they can get it done there.
Yeah.
But last thing I got, and then we'll let you go. Dan Wilson, obviously he's heading into his first full season as the manager, his first spring training. What differences, what similarities are you seeing that Dan has brought to the table? Maybe some of the culture that is in the clubhouse.
Yeah, for spring, it's always hard to tell day to day. Like there's so much work going on everywhere. It's tough to tell from just kind of a logistics standpoint. But, one of the things that really struck me last year is just how respected he is in the organization and really beloved in the organization. And, you know, it, it shouldn't be overlooked how much time he has spent in the minors. Like he was a guy that, and no fans saw this, but he would go a week at a time in Arkansas, or a week at a time in Everett, or a week at a time wherever, Modesto. And what that allowed him to do is, build relationships with coaches. And a lot of these coaches now have risen to the major league level. Pete Woodworth is just one of the examples. Like there have been a lot of coaches promoted within. So he's had existing relationships with those guys and also players. Like all the guys that we've talked about in this conversation, from Logan to George, go down the list, like he has been there as they have made their way through the system. So he just had instant credibility walking through the door last year. And
Mm-hmm.
how I think about a manager position, it's changed so much over the years, and it is a really big job. It's like a CEO is how it is now, because you not only you're managing players, because we always think about that. We think about managing the 26 guys and making the pitching changes and doing that sort of on-field stuff, but you're managing a big staff as well. You're getting information from analysts in the front office to your filtering to your coaching staff, filtering to your players. Like there's this whole organization happening, and you're trying to make it the best it can be, get the players the information that they need to be the best they can be. You're coaching the coaches. Like there's all of these things happening that you're in charge of. So the job is so much more than just, should I pinch hit here in the seventh inning? But he's got so many attributes that make him perfect for that role. Like he's somebody that guys love working for, and he's really respected. So uh, it's going to be interesting in his full season to see what it looks like. But he's got the skill set that you want in that role. That's for sure.
Yeah, and then that's one question that I wanted to, or that I want to ask him is, what exactly was his role down at those levels and throughout the minor league system? Like, what exactly was he doing on a day to day basis? And then, yeah, that's massive that you're able to watch this wave of guys come up into the major leagues, and now you're able to now manage those guys. It's a
Yeah.
huge benefit, and really excited to see. And hearing him talk about, Edgar, he's like, they've got a hitting meeting with Edgar. He's not even going to go in that room. He's going to let Edgar do his thing, and it's not the micromanaging. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that the past manager was doing that, but yeah, seems like a great start so far. So really
Yeah.
appreciate your, yeah,
Which I think is a good thing too, because there are meetings going on all the time, but at some point, trust your staff to make it happen. And they have a really talented staff. There's a lot of smart people in the organization, and we've seen it, especially on the pitching side, for the last number of years. It's been pretty impressive what they've done.
absolutely. Gary, appreciate your time as always. Looking forward to the next one. I'll be down there in a couple weeks, so we'll have to do one as we get closer to the season.
Yeah, that sounds great. It'll be great to see you down here.
Likewise. All right, man. Have a good one. We'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.